This is Viewpoint, a podcast by Cochrane Real Estate.
Welcome to Viewpoint, the podcast by Cochrane Real Estate. I'm Corey Duchateau, and I'm here with Harriet Murray, the owner and broker of Cochrane Real Estate. Hi, Harriet. How are you today?
Very well, and you?
Very well, thank you. So today we'll be sharing a basic guide for people from the U.S. and Canada and other countries who want to buy property in Mexico. So Harriet, I'd like to start by asking you to talk about how is buying property in Mexico different than buying in people's home countries such as U.S. or Canada?
Particularly in North America, the difference for Mexico is that there are not a lot of mortgages for properties. People keep homes and families and save them and raise their great-grandchildren in them. And they, for the most part, did what we did in the United States in the very beginning with savings and loans. What we did was everybody pooled their money, and then once someone drew their check, we were going to build their house next. That was the history of building in the United States. To be able to give any housing at all available is people built together one person's house and then saved money and then built the other person's house and so on and so on. So we maybe take it back to the idea that it's unique how we evolved the mortgages we have today, and they fit our needs and our culture and our fast pace, but they're not here in Mexico. That's not to say some banks don't make mortgages, but people are more conservative generally when they haven't had the strongest economy in the world. So banks will do mortgages right now because of the success and the time that foreigners have been here. They can get Mexican mortgages because now they have a way to check their credit in the U.S., for example. There were years when that was not available. So it's all based on credit is risk for the person giving the money for the construction. So we have over the years seen that most people are successful as Americans and Canadians coming here to have borrowed against the property they have in the States when the interest rates are favorable and they have equity, take that out. Take a small interest rate increase in their mortgage and come down here and buy. That was the most common way foreigners have been doing it. And that works when their market is good and their houses are moving and they have equity. If you don't have equity and you can't borrow against it, then, it's difficult. So what most people are doing now are downsizing if they are in that situation and trying to get something, for example, maybe pre-construction or just a more simple place until they can afford more. So you've got to have to know your money. You've got to figure out your money and how to manage it for something like this because it is considered for many people a luxury. And that's why so many people want to see, well, can I rent it out? With what we have in this ocean, yes, in the beaches, most people can rent what they have. And it should be commensurate with what they've got. I mean, I understand they rent for $40 a night little houses in the back end of Emiliano Zapata, which is the romantic zone, but it's going to be very simple. But you'll walk out and you'll enjoy the beach in front of you, and maybe it doesn't have a pool, but you'd go jump in the ocean.
Well, yeah, and then you have, of course, the multi-million-dollar condos right on the beach that rent for hundreds of dollars a night, and villas rent for thousands of dollars a night.
So basic on this is you have to analyze how much money you should devote to this and stay within your budget.
Okay, great. So what is done to make it safe buying here? And we can talk about the neighborhood being safe or the finances being safe. What can you tell us about that?
First thing you need to understand in the restricted zone, you have the maritime zone and you have a restricted zone. The restricted zone means the area in the maritime zone, on the beach, near the rocks, in the water, that is not to be owned by any foreigner for any reason. And that was done, I think, when we had Emiliano Zapata, the first mestizo president of Mexico, or someone will remind me that's wrong, but it came from a reason of do not want invasion. So that became perplexing in the 80s here in Mexico when they needed direct investment because their economy was not moving as fast into the contemporary, and we're very agricultural still. And so there is those precepts in the law and back to Roman times that they would give people rights, and that many times was rights with possession, but not ownership as we know it today. So they came up with a tool on rights. They had to create a trust, and then the person buying the property would not be the owner of record, but they would be primary beneficiary, which means the trust is only there to protect that they're not breaking the Mexican law. They will be respectful. They will pay a yearly fee to the trustee, and the trustee cannot act on any actions not given to them by the beneficiary in writing, so they're not going to be making decisions. So that vehicle gives you the ability to enjoy our lives as we have it here. All of Vallarta at this extent and all the shoreline up and down Bucerias, everybody's in that restricted zone. So with that tool, and it's proven to be successful, and it only started in the 80s, but it just they didn't say, we're going to test it out. So the first ones were less than 25 years. Now they're 50 years renewable. And that means a lot. The property can't be sold if they can't locate the heirs. They have to publicize for someone to know something. And then the ultimate thing, they would have to have, if it were sold for some reason, hold the money until they could find an heir. So they thought about it very thoroughly. This was done with notaries who are on the level of judges who are extremely adept in this kind of law, notary law. And that's what the safeness of it has been. And the great thing is it takes you out of probate. You do, since it's a trust and it's been vetted and you are the primary beneficiary, you name your heirs and they're called secondary, and then they inherit the property, and it doesn't have to be contested and go to court because probate is avoided with the trust if you leave your beneficiary name to succeed you. Then that's safe.
So a lot of people have questions about this trust vehicle, and some of the questions are, can they lose the property? Can they lease out the property? Can they sell the property? So can you talk about what rights and what they have with the trust?
Currently how it's operated in our experience, and now it's been close to over 25 years of seeing how the trusts work. If anything, they become more strict on things that could happen because, for example, someone dies and their heirs are going to be transferring the trust into making them primary beneficiaries. Everyone should want to do that because that makes you the legal representative. What they want to know is now it has to be very carefully not violating any other laws. But when the trust takes on the new person, they have to do a search of their background. And they're required that because so many laws have come from the United States that are law after law, but one of them is the anti-laundering money laws. So that's supposed to taint anything, but you're not going to lose your trust if I would say, for example, we knew one person that lost a trust, and I'm sure there are other stories, but decided they would tear down the house. So that answers your question. You can live in it, you can build in it, and you can sell it. But that person has to have a trust. If they're a foreigner, if they're a Mexican, they don't. But these people were going to build 5 condominiums in place of the house, thinking they were going to just reap a great deal of money and be very happy. And they didn't know that their builder used dynamite on some of the rock on the shoreline there to blast it out in order to secure the foundation. It seems he was getting too close to the edge. Well, they took that person's trust and they couldn't have it anymore. And so that meant they had to sell the lot, and someone else picked up the lot because it damaged supposedly the hotel next door. So those are the things that are extreme, but those are the things that sometimes happen. Unfortunately, these people just didn't use judgment or maybe didn't know the guy would do something like that.
Okay, so it's up to you as part of your job as an agent to make people aware of these kinds of things, like what rights you have and what you
Well-
don't have when you buy property in Mexico and you use a trust?
Yes, the thing here is also need to have professionals. I don't know how we get into this topic, but the fact is that real estate people here are cannot considered on the professional level to have a professional license like a doctor and an engineer and an accountant have. We're not considered professionals. We are a civil association. But we're under all the laws that apply to real estate, which Mexico has a great deal of emphasis on consumer protection. They follow it. They have it in their laws. They also reminded us with a regulation that we needed to start practicing it, including how we represented selling properties by how we describe them. We are on laws that will make us more professional and understand that we are supposed to offer transparency. The difference here is if we don't do that, it isn't the real estate board that can step in and change it and sanction the person. It would have to be going through one of the laws on the books that said this person did this. They happen to be a real estate agent, but they did this improperly, and then they will have whatever the law says that they're supposed to do to atone for it. This is not unique. Most of the world operates the way I'm describing. The notary law is the largest body of law in the world, and that is not English law, which is more straightforward but younger. So we have to be always aware that we have to know what the law applies to here. People will tell me, oh, I don't have a contract with that person. But you do have an implied contract with that person, and a good attorney will know where to look up in the code what civil code applies to that situation and how you resolve it. That's what you have to do. So they have many different bodies of law. They have constitutional law, they have notary law, they have what we would call law for law and a medicine. But the thing that we end up with for ourselves is where we are not on that level. We are just civil code law. And so that means there are not a lot of things that we can do to sanction a person who breaks the ethics or breaks laws. Yes, you can acquire property here. You can have the use of it. You can leave it to your children. Here, it's going to be in a trust. So instead of calling yourself the owner, you're the primary beneficiary. And that means that's the protection for you to be able to be in the property and do all those things we just mentioned. Leave it to your children, remodel it, sell it. But that means when you make those actions and you do those things, it's not the same thing as it would be if you were just selling it outright. And if that's what you want to have, then you need to go to the interior to a Hique, which is beautiful, and own there. And then guess what? You have to leave a will since you don't have a trust. And that will have to go through probate. I guess the end of just basic would be realize you're going to learn a new culture and a new way things are done. And don't be judgmental until you've been here long enough to earn that right.
The last question that I have is, how is money handled to buy a property in Mexico?
Well, everything is wire transfer now, and we respect the Mexican currency is the currency of the land. You can buy in any currency, but it will always be translated to pesos. And so we make it convenient that if you want to do it in francs or you want to do it in dollars, it will be based on what the peso is that day, of what the amount of money that you would be paying for what you're buying. And it is not as easy as in the past with banking and international wires, but it can be done. And that's when it's very important to have someone to trust and make sure you're using the right people to help you transfer money.
Great. Thank you very much for giving us this information today about buying basics in Mexico for foreigners, meaning people from U.S. or Canada or other countries. Do you have anything else that you'd like to say on this topic before we wrap up today?
If it sounds complicated or too much work, I think you are missing out on what the intent is to make you aware of not being frivolous and shallow at what you make your decisions on. And I'm sure you're not, but you've got to accept responsibility that if anything you want to know in this country and this amount of history of law is You are responsible for your own decisions.
Yes, Mexico is definitely a country that puts a lot of focus on personal responsibility.
That is the law. And because I grew up in Louisiana, we have both laws in Louisiana, so that's strange sometimes. But the point is the older law is, and so the way I tell people is ask a lot of questions and ask more questions because you maybe didn't understand their answer. So ask it again, and you hope you at the end both of you understood what you said to each other. Ask a lot of questions.
Okay, that's great advice. Well, thank you very much for being here today, Harriet, to talk about buying basics in Mexico. And, Harriet has been here in Vallarta since 1997, so she has a lot of experience in this topic in the local way of doing things. So anybody who's interested in thinking about buying in Mexico and how it might be different from buying in the U.S. or Canada, definitely give Harriet a call. You can find her on her website at casasenvias.com or on YouTube at Casas and Villas Puerto Vallarta, the Cochrane Real Estate channel. So please like and subscribe to the channel on YouTube and find her on social media. And we'll see you again next time for another episode.
This was Viewpoint, a podcast from Cochrane Real Estate.